Jeff, you ready?
Ready?
Kelly, you ready? Call the Montague City Council meeting to order. We could do roll call, please.
Jerry Wonders, not here. Lisa Keel. Present. Susan Newhoff. Here. Robert Hires.
Here.
Laura LaGuire.
Here.
Nicole Schultz.
Yes.
Mayor Loman.
Here, do we have any word from Jerry at all, Jeff? Okay,
Not heard.
do we need to make a motion, or just wait till she gets here?
We'll wait till she gets here, or we can make it at the next meeting.
Okay, all right. Invite the audience to stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Remind the audience and the council members that this month is a Memorial Day, so the words that you just said should come back to, that we can hear again. We have an agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Or a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda. Number 5 on the agenda is public comment about any agenda items. We have several things under general business and consent items. If anybody would like to make a comment, please let me know, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please use the microphone. Go ahead.
I'm Brother Melton here. My address is 6854 Post Road, and I'm with the class of 2025 from mine.
Okay, very good, thank you. Anybody else? And for other students, we'll sign your paperwork afterwards their meeting. Number 6, consent of agenda items. Questions or a motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda items, including regular bills in the amount of $182,471, of which $366 is passed through to others.
Second.
We have a motion and support. Is there any questions or suggestions?
I had a couple of questions. Page number 8. Of the budget, down under Artisan Market LLC. I didn't quite understand the expenditures there, and I guess I was looking for an explanation on that.
Yep, you're talking 7067, check number 7067. On the far left there, third column. Artisan Market LLC, and then it's Artisan Market dash Rent and Electric. Is that where you're looking across?
Yeah, the account is 956, and then I didn't see a check number. Oh yeah, there it is, okay. 767, correct.
Okay, so those are, so the way the Artisan Market originally was formed, so city property, the city bought portions of the original sheds, but Artisan Market LLC purchased the original sheds. Through time, the DDA then is purchasing those sheds, so they become the property of the city and the DDA. So every year there's a proportion of that budget which is allocated for purchasing those sheds out. Usually it's finalizing the payment on one from the previous year and then opening the payment on another. So there's 14 sheds. I think the city has full control of 4.5 sheds at this point. So then over the next couple of years, the same thing will happen. Eventually, the city will own all the sheds.
I realize that that all took place before I was on the council, but I guess what I'm looking for is some information about what the actual cost is on a shed. I see a $9,000 payment there and a $6,300 payment there. I haven't looked at all the sheds down there, but I have a couple of sheds in my yard that I bought over in Fremont that are somewhat similar, and I didn't pay anywhere as close to $9,000, so I guess that's what I'm looking for, is some kind of an explanation as to what the sheds cost us
Sure.
originally, and is there,
Yep, so it's, I have a breakdown, I can show you all we basically purchasing them back, so to speak, purchasing them from Artisan Market LLC for the at-cost price. So those are all listed, and I can give you a list of what those costs are, and then kind of the timeline of when those are going to be purchased.
who is that Artisan Market LLC?
So Dean Weaver, so he was the one that originally started it, and so he put up 60% of the cost to develop the Artisan Market.
So Jess, is that strictly just the shed, or does that also take into account like the dolomite and the prep work? I mean, is it a portion of the whole development that gets tied to each shed as well?
Yeah, tied to the building and the associated boardwalk out front to do the connections.
Okay, so it's not strictly just the shed.
Right, yeah. So
Also
it's
installation.
installation, delivery, all those different components, and part of that is, it's kind of like a parcel, so for each cottage, there's kind of an area surrounding it, the pad itself, the shed itself, the electrical hookup, if there's water hookups, those sorts of things. But if you want to stop in at any time, Paul, I can kind of walk through that list with you, and I can show you.
Okay.
those.
Anything else, Paul?
I think there was one other one that. I guess the other one I had a question about was the walk the beat expenditure. The $600.
Again, DDA expenditure, so DDA approved that, Mayor Loman or Laura, 2 or 3 meetings ago,
Yeah.
Walk the Beat sponsorship.
Yeah.
So that's to sponsor one of the sites, one of the music sites for that day.
I think it was the same as what they did last year.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? We have a motion and support. Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Newhoff,
Yes.
Councilwoman McGuire,
Yes.
Councilman Hires,
Yes.
Councilwoman Keel,
Yeah.
Councilman Schultz,
Yes.
Mayor Loman.
Yes. Number 7A.
7A special license application, Killer Blues Headstone Project. So this is, you had seen the request at the last work session. There was an initial approval for the one event which was coming up. The first event, June 2nd, is that right, Steve? All right, the first one, June 2nd, just to make sure that we didn't miss that timeline. So this is to formalize the approval of that, as well as just add the other 2 fundraisers, so August 4th and September 1st. The other component which was needed as part of that application process was local law enforcement approval. So Chief Johnson did review the application, did approve, and also to have the final site plan map for what that will look like. If you were down and participated in the fundraiser for the Friends of the Library, same setup. You're basically isolating that site with fencing from the surrounding area, have one entrance and exit, and then have one location where the beer is served. So that is shed number 6, the pub shed here, and then just some of the other amenities. So stage here, entrance, exit. If there's food trucks, possible locations of those food trucks within the vicinity, and then just denoting the perimeter fence. So again, this is just to formalize the initial approval for that June 2nd, and then to approve the other 2 dates so that it can all be submitted at the same time. There is one other fundraiser that will happen during the summer, and we're trying to finalize who that nonprofit organization will be. So you'll see something identical to this come forward at that time, but you will not see it until that's formalized.
Questions or comments or a motion?
And it runs from 5 to 9, correct? That's the time span.
Correct.
I am so excited to see that the artisan market is getting used for things like this. I think it's a perfect venue. It's easy to surround it and isolate it. It's fun. It brings business to those vendors. It's a really pretty space, and I'm really glad to see it.
Is there a motion?
Make a motion that we approve the license for Killer Blues project.
Second.
Now, is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Schultz,
Yes.
Councilwoman Newhoff,
Yes.
Councilwoman McGuire,
Yes.
Councilman Hires,
Yes.
Councilwoman Keel,
Yes.
Mayor Longman.
Yes. Number 7B, Jeff?
7B, social district permit for North Grove Brewers. So this is the same process, an application that you have seen previously. So initially, in establishing the social district, the council approved 4 locations for participation: North Grove Brewers, Vino y Lago, or Book Nook Best Sellers, JCA Enterprises, which is Jimmy's, and Sawyer's Brewing. Sawyer's Brewing and Book Nook have already received the permit and been approved by the council. North Grove had not been approved by the council, so this is to formalize that approval. If you look at their actual State of Michigan Liquor Control Commission license, it already has been listed as being approved for the social district. I talked with the MLCC, they processed it regardless of the council's approval. They apologized, so we still need to go through the process. If we wanted to disapprove it, we could, but they were already approved as part of the social district. This formalizes that last step of the process. I guess last note, we have not seen any application materials from JCA Enterprises or Jimmy's Pub yet, so I expect at some point we will.
Jeff, do we know if there's an issue regarding their participation?
No, they picked up the application materials, talked through it with them. I think they just have not formalized the process.
Questions or comments or a motion?
I move that we approve the social district permit for North Grove Breweries. Support.
Now, is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman McGuire,
Yes.
Councilwoman Keel,
Yes.
Councilman Schultz,
Yes.
Councilman Hires,
Yes.
Councilwoman Newhoff,
Yes.
Mayor Longman.
Yes. Number 7C.
Mayor, if I could, one more question on that subject, please. I just want to clarify, if for some reason Jimmy's decides not to participate, it still moves forward, or is it canceled? Bear with me, but I'm trying to remember our conversation.
It still moves forward. They would be removed from the map and signage and
All of
other
that.
associated items.
Basically, we go around them.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
7C, Jeff?
7C, Resolution 2023-0101, abandoning public sidewalk. So this is the sidewalk section discussed at the last work session related to the sidewalk in front of 8605 Mead Street, 8605 Mead Street. To abandon this section of sidewalk that goes to the entrance of that residence, as well as crosses the front or next to that house and across the paved parking area. So the resolution itself abandons that as a public sidewalk. That is kind of the legal obligation of the city. Any other associated work, whether there's a reconfiguration of the sidewalk, additional parking, that's all separate. So this allows for that second step to occur. If that second step occurs, I know Mr. Potter has discussed he'd like to see some revisions. I think that would be a discussion for Mr. Potter with Public Works to kind of finalize what those might be, because that's really more of a project scope and finalizing what those budget allocations would be. So this is to remove that legal obligation of that sidewalk. Again, part of this is largely because of this sidewalk as part of that construction project. The intent was to keep it connected to this sidewalk, but recognizing that this goes across the paved parking, and there is a new crosswalk here, and there's a very nice sidewalk that goes all along that other parcel. So the further development along that side of the street, William Street, is very unlikely to occur because of how the houses are, the alley, some other infrastructure there. So we already have existing sidewalk completely on the other side, so this abandons that section.
Questions or comments or motion?
Now, when you say abandon, we don't pull it up and take it away, do we?
Nope.
We just leave it as it is?
Yep.
Great, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I move that we accept resolution 2023-01.
Support.
Now, is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Newhoff? Yes. Councilwoman McGuire?
Yes.
Councilman Schultz?
Yes.
Councilman Hires?
Yes.
Councilwoman Keel?
Yeah.
Mayor Holman?
Yes. Number 7D, Jeff?
Resolution 2023-03, White Lake Mute Swan Control Program. This was submitted by the Muskegon Conservation District, kind of on behalf of the Michigan DNR. This is to renew a permit for that control program within White Lake. Started about 10 years ago, the original permit in 2013. Program's been going on in 2 permits, so each in 5-year periods. So the state is asking to continue with that program, so this resolution allows the state to continue that program for mute swan control. Nothing has changed within the program itself. It's a formality for them to issue a permit basically to the Conservation District, but for the state, and then they have USDA actually does the control services. I guess the other thing to note is all municipalities surrounding the lake have to approve this in order for it to occur because it's for the entire lake.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, comments. I am really troubled by this. Again, I'm troubled that the DNR is once again making what seems to be almost an arbitrary decision about the life of one species over another, the life of one swan over another. I know that the people who want the mute swan out are fond of calling it an aggressive alien species, and anytime you lay a label like that on something, you immediately conjure up fear among people who are trying to live around this animal. The fact is it's a swan. They talk about wanting the mute out in order, the hopes that the trumpeter swan will come back. We don't know what trumpeter swan populations were like here in the first place before they were hunted to near extinction. We do know that they are coming back hugely. There are already 3,000 trumpeter swans at last count in Michigan. They're doing well. We can also assume, because we see this with everything, that if you kill the mute swans and pull them out, it leaves territory open for more mute swans to move back in. They like this lake, it works for them. So just as we had a 10-year project to kill the swans, now they're embarking on another 5-year project to kill the swans, and I think you can assume that this will just keep going and going because this is their solution. to a problem that they see. I am troubled by the fact that they malign this swan for being what they call aggressive. Swans are aggressive. Swans protect their territory and they protect their young. And I'm a bit shocked that suddenly this apparently is a bad thing for an animal to do. I'm appalled that we would now start making life and death decisions about a wild creature because it's aggressive, if this is its nature, what it was created to do and the way it acts. The fact is, it is a wild creature, so we need to stay away from them, just like we don't walk up to bears. You know, we don't canoe around big whales. We stay away from mute swans because they are defenders of their territory. I'm also deeply concerned because I can't help but think that there's a financial issue behind this. When they talk about reduction of species on the lake, they are talking about, in part, other waterfowl. The mute swan has no financial benefit to the DNR. They've already declared that it is not an animal, it's not a waterfowl that people should eat because they have a habit of eating plants that uptick toxins from the soil. They graze, if you will, on the bottoms of lakes and ponds, and so they are taking up toxins and poisons that have settled into the sediment, into the bottom. So they are deemed unhealthy. That means they can't sell permits to kill them as a huntable species that you can eat. So part of me just says follow the money. The species that they are concerned about on White Lake are species for which they can sell hunting permits. And they do. And here's the other thing, if you live around this lake, you know that when fall comes, you can hear them every morning at sunup, you can hear the guns. There is a very robust hunting season on this lake. And I have to believe that if the DNR and water management and wildlife management people were so concerned about reduction of species on this lake, they would do something to slow down the hunting on it. But they don't. Incidentally, trumpeter swans, about which they are so concerned, have made such a comeback. They are now hunted in 11 states, much along the eastern seaboard, North Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, North and South, plus North and South Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Utah. They have become a species, the trumpeter swan, which departments of natural resources can now sell hunting permits for. I think it's significant that when the International Swan and Habitat Specialists met at a 2014 International Swan Symposium, this is international, they completely disputed what they called misrepresentations about mute swans by United States wildlife officials. They said specifically the mute swans are no more aggressive than other species. They do not displace other waterfowl. They do not deplete subaquatic vegetation, and they are, in fact, beneficial to the environment. The debate over mute swans is really complicated, and I think this is not something that we decide simply because the permit is up again. I'm also disturbed that there is no public hearing on this. There was 10 years ago, but now this is simply a renewal of the permit. And I think for something that has drawn as much attention as control, quote unquote, of the mute swan, this would be essential. Finally, two things. The Audubon magazine recently, they have been pretty much a proponent of mute swan control. And they recently came out with an editorial suggesting that it might be time to relax our concerns about mute swans because climate change is already limiting their habitat. And they have looked at countless studies And what they have determined is that with a rise of 1.5 centigrade, mute swans will lose an estimated 40% of their habitat. It's already going to happen. By far the worst offenders, and you know this, if you want to talk about habitat destruction on this lake, it is human beings. It is homes and cottages built along the lake shore, lawns that are planted right down to the lake shore, herbicides, fertilizers, and pesticides to keep those lawns green, which then run off into the lake. It's septic systems which are leaking into the lake. We are the worst offenders. So in my opinion, before we start pointing fingers at a swan, we look at other options for remediation of habitat, if in fact that's a problem, and we look deeper into motivation behind this. Thank you.
Jeff, is there any data that they've collected over the last 10 years that this is or is not making a difference?
Not that I have seen. I can make that request to get some data.
Okay, that'd be great.
Can we ask Steve what Whitehall's position is on this?
Whitehall approved it. It is my understanding that the authorities don't need our approval. They're going to do it anyhow.
Any comments? Paul?
Believe it or not, Susan and I didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I spent some time doing some research on this and read some of the same stuff that Susan did, and I think that we're being misled by the people that don't like the mute swan. There are areas that do eat the mute swan. There's areas that eat the eggs from the mute swans. I guess that's a personal choice, but there's a lot of countries where it's illegal to harvest them. They're all protected. I have this problem with this. We're going to go out in the swamp and let these people shoot the swans, and I hear people complaining about the deer and the geese, and where are we going to draw the line? When are we going to start shooting off all the deer? When are we going to start shooting off all the geese that are along our shoreline? Maybe we need to learn to live with the animals a little bit more and quit trying to eliminate them. I see the DNR in their infinite wisdom yesterday did an approval where rabbits and squirrels now can be disposed of 12 months out of the year. You don't have to buy a hunting license. If you don't like squirrels in your yard, you can kill them all. If you don't like rabbits in your yard, you can kill them all. And I never trusted the DNR and the DEQ anyway, but I support what Susan says here. I would hope that everybody thinks about how they're going to vote on this.
Should we move for a public hearing?
Or table it till we can get some information, if there is any available on data or a little more research?
There's a lot of numbers out there. They're kind of confusing. They don't add up from what I read. It looks to me like they've been killing mute swans, but it's not doing any good.
For our area or just in general?
One of the problems in our particular area, from what I read, is they're killing them in the White River Marsh, but they're not killing them in the Muskegon River Marsh.
So they just
And,
moved down.
yeah, what's going to happen?
So we
I'd like to
become-
make a motion that we deny the permit.
A second.
Other discussion?
So Jeff, did you say that supposedly, I heard what you said, but supposedly all of the municipalities around the lake need to approve it?
That was my understanding. That's how the original permit was, that the state would not issue a permit until all municipalities around the lake approved.
Okay.
Other discussion?
I think we should do more research before we make any decision.
I agree.
They've already done some very nice research. Thank you, Susan. That was very nice, but maybe we need to do more before we make a decision.
I can live with that.
I'm sorry, Paul?
I can live with that.
So are we suggesting maybe that we table this?
And maybe we should have a public hearing to get some comment from, it's made available.
Seek public
I'll support that.
Second. I would, along that line, I would suggest, excuse me, if you want more data from wildlife management and DNR, be really specific about what you want.
Other discussion? We have a motion to table this. Is there a specific time frame or anything else you want done with that?
What are you guys comfortable with? I mean,
Next
it's gonna
January.
be- It's a little late, but we're gonna need some expert opinion, even those that you may not agree with have a right to be heard, but we also should hear from the other side as well, so we can make a knowledgeable, informed decision on this. So it's gonna take a little bit to put that together, isn't it? I don't think 1 month is gonna be enough. How long is it before it's just a done issue? How long do we have?
That I do not know. I know that the current permit is expiring or has expired already. I don't know what time period they were thinking of doing the next control program.
Do we need to put together a subcommittee and?
Someone to meet with them.
First, we have a motion on the floor to table this, and we probably should take care of that before we talk about a subcommittee. Roll call, please. Oh, is there any other discussion?
Table it to July, that gives us 2 months.
And if we have to, we could table it again, I guess. Is that your motion then, Bob?
That sounds fine.
He's going to table it till July? Okay. Is there any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Hires,
Yes.
Councilwoman Keel,
Yes.
Councilwoman McGuire,
Yes.
Councilwoman Newhoff,
Yes.
Councilman Schultz,
Yes.
Mayor Loman.
Yes. Now, if you'd like to set up a committee to look into this? Any volunteers? Susan would like to?
Because
Anybody else?
Oh, no, we'll talk
Bob,
about it.
you want a third person? Lisa? Susan, Bob, and Lisa, Jeff? Okay. We don't need a motion for that, do we? Okay. Number 8 on the agenda is public hearing, public comments. This is open public comments. Doesn't have to be about any specific thing. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And let me know that you want to speak and come up and use the microphone, give your name and address. And again, no action will be taken, but we'd like to hear your comments.
Bill Tarr, 5011 Darwin. First, I wanted to thank Councilman Schultz for the attention to detail that he's obviously put into the activities related to budget, and to Councilwoman Newhoff and Councilman Schultz in looking beyond the surface of the Mute Swan. And I want to thank everyone for getting the crossing warning signals put into place on Dowling. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Number 9, city manager update. Jeff?
Have anything special this evening, as we will be talking about most of the updates as part of the work session, just talking through some of the upcoming budget recommendations. Again, we will have the actual work session for the budget on June 5th, and then at June 19th, we will do the approval for the formal budget. So I will reserve some time during work session.
Okay. Any questions for Jeff? Number 10 on the agenda is message and communication from myself and council members. Laura?
Oh, good, thank you.
No.
Lisa? Susan?
No, thank you for listening.
Paul?
I'm good for now, thank you.
All right. Number 11 on the agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a meeting is adjourned. We will take a short 2-minute break, and then we'll go into our work session. call to order the work session of the Montague City Council. Number 2, Jeff, rentals and...
Okay, this evening we have Tabitha Cox with us from Howard Hanna Real Estate Executives to talk through short-term rentals. Just a little bit before she starts, the city, as this was kind of originally coming across the state, did put in place a rental registration, rental dwelling registration. Part of that was early on in the process, we knew that there were some short-term and some long-term rentals within the city, but did not necessarily know where they were at. So just started formulating that so that we could at least know where the rentals are, who's responsible, some of those items. So if you're interested, that is Chapter 18, Buildings and Building Regulations. It's Article 6. But again, it's largely just a contact piece and getting some basic information. So very kind of initial steps that the city took 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. So, Tabitha.
Alrighty. Wow. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me a chance to just chat with you guys a little bit about short-term rentals today. Just first of all, a little bit about me, since most of you don't know who I am. My name is Tabitha Cox. I am a realtor with Howard Hanna Real Estate Executives. I've been one since 2015. And while Howard Hanna is not a company that you guys have probably heard about around here until now, we are actually the largest family-owned real estate company in the country with 400 offices, 14,000 agents. We've only made it as far as Lansing, Detroit, and Jackson in the Michigan area until now. How I came to be here is that in 2019, my family found this little tiny project house on Whitbeck just off of Dowling, and we bought it, and we've been there on weekends and in the summer since 2019. And about a year and a half into coming and doing that, my husband and I looked at each other and were like, why do we live in mid-Michigan? And so from that point on, we made plans that we would eventually move here when our youngest daughter graduated from high school. Different things happened that made it possible that we ended up with moving here this summer. So my daughter is now a junior. She started her junior year of high school at Montague High School this year, and my husband is the elementary principal out in Newaygo. And so we have brought ourselves here full-time in July, and I'm super excited to be in this community, to make it home. We love everything about what it has been to be here. My son, who's in college, loves that this is where he gets to come home to now instead, and part of our hope is that our kids will someday want to land here as well. So I am new to here, but we do love this place, and so that is why I wanted to approach you guys today, because as a real estate agent, I watch the real estate world, and since we started being around here in 2019, I have watched the real estate market in this area religiously. I watch everything that comes on the market, and I listen and I observe, because most people don't know who I am, so I can listen quite incognito much of the time. And some of the things that I had thought were going to happen, I have begun to see happen. With all the revitalization in Muskegon, we are seeing that trickle out into the surrounding areas. People are looking to see, oh, all this stuff is going on here. We are the last untapped lakeshore communities for tourism along Lake Michigan, and I see people coming. So if I don't want to be right in Muskegon, where can I go for a good investment in a house, in a short-term rental, long-term rental, in some business perhaps, but where can I invest that's close by? Because it's nice to be in the outskirts of where all the busyness is going to be. I know people at time, I hear them say, I don't want to become a Grand Haven, and I do not see this becoming a Grand Haven. I do see Muskegon becoming that, especially the whole drive out to the lakeshore, very much like Holland's Drive is out to the lakeshore. And so as I've watched that, some of the things I've noticed, I would bet if there was a way to track that for every house in this area, in the White Lake area, that's been listed in the last couple years that has been less than $250,000, that there are probably at least 2 to 3 investors that are bids in those. There's no way to track all the offers. We don't keep track of that in our system, but I would bet at least 2 to 3 of every offers in those multiple offer situations are coming from investors. I would also hypothesize that in the last 2 or 3 years, since 2020 especially, because the push for short-term rentals just hit exponentially higher during COVID, I would bet that your short-term rental population has probably increased, at least doubled since before COVID to now with the mix and just the investors. It's a whole new world for investors out there who are being educated and learning about how investing in real estate is such a great thing to do. And the short-term rentals is where a lot of that push is at. Because in some instances, it's the way for somebody to own a second home and be able to afford to pay for it, where they wouldn't be able to otherwise. But otherwise, one of the statistics I read is that 1/4 of the hosts on Airbnb own 2/3 of the listings on Airbnb. So you're also getting a lot of businesses and big time corporate investors into the short-term rental space as well. So what's the issue with short-term rentals? If you have them in your community, that's great for tourism. We love bringing in the tourists, they bring their money. We want them to spend their money here. But some of the issues with letting short-term rentals go unregulated and not having a plan for how we're going to approve them or not is that, one, they create nuisance issues, noise, clutter, trash, many things like that. And we can try to regulate that, but that requires people to regulate that to some extent. Beyond that, though, it starts to change the makeup of the communities and the neighborhoods. So if you're in a subdivision and 5 of those become short-term rentals, it changes that makeup of that neighborhood for all the other houses that are living there. It also pushes the prices of homes up, because once a home starts being used as a short-term rental, it starts to have the value more like commercial real estate, where you value it based on the money that the home is making, not just it as a home for a family. And so that starts to push the prices of those homes up. And we're seeing that. I think you're seeing that in the price. Now, granted, it's like this all over the country, but for a while, like even in the beginning, the first quarter of this year, prices in other parts of Michigan were going down. They did not go down here. So we're seeing that push up of those prices. And one of the hardest things is that as those homes get filled as short-term rentals, we lose housing for the workforce. And the people who are working here in all these establishments don't have anywhere they can afford to live that is within the communities. An example of this, I just got told yesterday from somebody who did not know I was doing this, that they had a friend who is getting evicted from her apartment that she's lived in for many years because they're going to turn it into a short-term rental. And she can't afford to rent anywhere else. So whereas her and I think a child going to go, they're going to have to leave the community because they can't find a place to live here. One of the main arguments for short-term rentals and the big push from Lansing, especially last year, to pull away local control so that local control could not say there can't be rentals. There was a big push in Lansing last year to take that control away from you guys and say that homeowners have the right to do whatever they want to with their property. It is their right. However, to me, I don't see how that stands up when that is entirely what local control is about. I can't put a second dwelling on my property because there's regulations against that. I have a client who wanted to move to a house in Blue Lake Township, and he has a machine shop where he works on very high-end race car engines. And I called this big pole barn out in the woods, way out in the country. That is not within the regulations for what he could do, so he could not buy that house. So we can't apply the concept of it's my property, I should be able to do with it what I want in the case of short-term rentals, and not apply it to these other areas as well. Part of the reason that it's being separated out, I believe, from the rest of the things that we would regulate around property use is because there's just a lot of money behind the push to separate it out. There's a lot of money in the lobbyists that are fighting for that. And that includes one of the biggest one being the National Association of Realtors. And as well as Airbnb, which is actually a very large lobbyist group. Those two have put a lot of money into fighting regulations on short-term rentals. And that's because a lot of realtors are investors. I mean, we know this world, we work in this world, it doesn't scare us, and we know the value of investing in real estate. I own rentals, I manage long-term rentals. So I live in this world too. I watch the wholesale world and a lot of different areas of real estate I pay attention to. And so it is because of the money that's behind the push for not allowing local control of short-term rental regulations that you see this coming up in Lansing. Now, at the end of the, I don't know what you call it, session last year, at the end of '22, the bill that was in the House to take away local control didn't end up getting out of where it needed to go, so it all kind of got dropped. And I've heard different scenarios. I've heard some people say, oh, it's going to pass and we're all going to lose local control. And I've heard other people say that now with all the new people we have in the House and the Senate, that it's probably not going to get picked back up again. Whatever happens with that bill, part of my being here is to just say, please pay attention to that, because truly, if they want to pass something that would impact all of us across the state by taking away the local control of us to be able to regulate what our communities are going to look like, that's something that really should be on the ballot and something that we should be paying attention to. Instead of we just hear, well, we should be able to do what we want with our property, and we kind of like that concept, but we don't realize what that means if they take away the control from us to be able to decide what our communities are going to look like. Another thing is that as real estate agents, it's called fiduciary responsibility, is to my client. So if I'm selling a house, I can't advise my client to not take the investor's offer. If out of all the offers, the best one for my client is the investor offer, then I have to share that with them. You know, and my client can say, I don't want to sell to an investor, but what's usually going to happen in that case is other realtors aren't going to tell you that that it's an investor, because then that becomes a problem. If I'm their buyer's agent, then that's not me doing my best job for them if I let it be known that they're an investor. So realtors are not the people who are going to control this from happening. It's either going to be the sellers themselves who can decide who they want to sell a house to, or it's going to be local control that says we have these rules about short-term rentals. So when I have a buyer who says, oh, I want to do a short-term rental, I say, well, that's not really going to work in this community because they will only let you do it here and here, what have you. And there's many different ways to regulate short-term rentals. And I guess that's mostly what I'm bringing to your attention, is to start having that conversation. What would it look like to regulate short-term rentals? How do you support those who have been doing them? I have a friend who has a short-term rental in Fruitland Township for 10 years. She's had a rental there, and she's selling it now because of all the pushback they're having about short-term rentals in Fruitland Township and how they've made that almost impossible for people to do. So find a way to both support those who have done it for a long time, or have a certain number, decide how many of them you want to have, how much of your percentage of your housing number you want to have tied up as short-term rentals, give licensing to them. There's lots of different ways to do it. Just start to have that conversation of what that might look like for this community, where you would want them to be, how they would be regulated, so that they don't ruin, because what I see is lots of people coming in this community, investors who don't even live here, and you get too much push and then you lose control because there's already too much influence in another way. And I wanted you to know that before we get to that point where there's all that influence in here that we haven't been aware of. Yeah, I guess that's it. At the end of the day, I just hope that we can be proactive in how we want this community to look. I'm a big proponent in believing that we're always either growing and changing or we're dying, and if we're not active in how we want things to look and what we want the atmosphere of this town to be, that we lose control of what it will become. So, are there any questions?
Do you have any questions for Tabitha?
I have a question maybe for Jeff. What percentage of houses in Montague are rentals, short-term rentals? Do you know that?
I do not know. Steve knows. I guess one thing just for the council, so a lot of this would essentially fall on planning commission because it's really a zoning issue as far as location, use that component. Going through the master plan process right now, even that does not really cover it, but it's utilizing that master plan once it's approved to then do the zoning language to do what the council wants to do. So that language has to come from planning commission. Even if the council wanted to regulate short-term rentals, its authority as far as like where they're placed in location is pretty limited because of the different roles between planning commission and city council. So if there's a certain push in one direction, that has to be a recommendation to the planning commission. You do have 3 representatives on the planning commission sitting in this room right now, the mayor, Councilman Hires, and myself. So we can certainly reflect that, but if it comes as a recommendation from the council to them as far as which direction to head. We're still in the middle of that process with the master plan, but probably good timing to start those conversations.
I know you said it's chapter 18, article 6. Could you send me a copy of that in email?
Sure.
And then just, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, I have this article which was about the bill that was coming through the House and the Senate last year. Mostly, it just does a good job of telling you the different issues with short-term rentals and how different communities that are lakeshore communities in Michigan are dealing with the pros and cons of this. And so I wanted to give a copy of that to each of you guys just to have, because they will explain it better than even I could.
Thank you, Tabitha, you did a good job. I sat down with Tab a little bit before these meetings, and at first I was kind of like, what do we have to worry about, right? This is Montague, we haven't really changed much over the years, but as we talked and she discussed, you know, people are coming in that you're not even aware of buying property, buying real estate, that before you know it, it could end up like a Pentwater where the majority is short-term rentals. People like you and I have trouble affording housing because everything, as Tabitha mentioned, has escalated. So I kind of like the idea of having so many permits, right? Like those that have the short-term rentals now, whether it's like grandfathered in, and then based on the size of our community or the number of housing structures along the lake, however you wanted to quantify it, say, okay, there'll be so many that are available, whether it be a lottery draw, first come, first serve, whatever, and that's their permit to have a short-term rental. And when that property sells or the people pass away or move away, that goes back into the lottery draw, just to somehow manage how much of our community is short-term rentals. So I just thought it was an important topic that come before our community.
Other comments or questions for Tabitha?
I know other communities are doing it where they're keeping it mostly in the commercial districts. So as you guys do the master plan and you're building above and around all the stores and things like that too, that's a possibility along the water, but then leave the neighborhoods to be neighborhoods. There's lots, and that article will talk about a number of different ways that other communities are doing it, so.
Anything else? Thank you, Tabitha.
Thanks, Tabitha.
Thank you.
Number 7B, draft budget overview. Jeff.
All right.
And I meant that completely seriously.
I know. And again, the actual work session is not till the next meeting, but we are getting closer and closer though. So just to provide some more overview, also since the last meeting I kind of had a general list, so we're starting to refine those. I think the big thing to note here is for revenue, property tax with the current mills, 16.4. That's assumed. We are right about that point where we start lowering our millage because of the Headley Amendment. So we're trying to finalize that number. If we do the full collection at 16.4, that's about $1.2 million. So we're trying to finalize that just to see how the numbers work out. Local community stabilization, we are again budgeting conservatively. In the past couple of years, this is pretty much the first payment allotment that the city gets, and depending on the second payment on how well the state does, we do get a second payment, but the value of that can range by $100,000. So we commonly just budget for the first allocation. So that's about $250,000. A couple other items, and some of this is going to be transfers out of the city's general fund. So because we do have a general fund balance, approximately $1 million, which is about 75% of our overall budget. So that means that even if we were not collect another dollar for the following fiscal year, we could operate 3/4 of the year. The council has set that ratio at about 25%. So we've been consistently above that for a couple reasons, because we are trying to make sure that once we start getting our millage lowered, whether we want to or not, that we have some buffer, but also to take care of the pension issues that we've been addressing over the last couple of years. So we have some buffer. Then we have for the last couple of years used some of those extra funds to do additional streets, roads, water projects, sewer projects, etc. This next year, we're going to take some of those funds to also work on some major parks projects, because parks are an expensive endeavor. So we're starting to get the numbers in from the engineers to kind of finalize those. So I'll hit on a couple of those this evening. The first one, streets. So we will get our standard allocation from MDOT, about $345,000 for major streets. So these are all the main roadways: Old Channel Trail, Stanton, Cook, Hancock, Dowling, Industrial Park. So that's for all street activities on those major roads. Local streets about 125, so just under 125,000. We're also taking some general fund monies, 120,000, that will go into that major street fund. Part of that is for the Wilcox Street major project coming up. Part of that is just to do some general maintenance, chip and seal projects, allows a little bit of a buffer. Local streets, same thing, because those are smaller in scale, we don't have to construct them as heavy duty. So only recommending 50,000 transferred to that. A couple other projects, so water fund, or not water fund, let me jump back up, launch ramp fund, $100,000. That is an enterprise fund, so it's meant to be self-sustaining, but if we do improvements down there, it's not self-sustaining enough to take on $100,000 a year. To really focus on the fish cleaning station, so engineers are finalizing the designs for that and putting in a new grinder pump. Essentially, if you go down there now, it's a small room with one little counter for the fish cleaning station. Opens up one whole end of that building, puts in a walk-around fish cleaning station, so you can have 8 to 10 people walk around there. Of that 100,000, there's about 40,000 that's just for the grinder, so it's not a cheap piece of equipment. So 100,000 would be allocated from general fund to the launch ramp. Water fund also has a state drinking water assessment grant that the city will receive. That's essentially money in, money out for activities to update our water management plan, to do some survey and GIS work, kind of do all this work behind the scenes for the lead and copper project, and some other water fund activities. So that is, when you see it for the final budget, is essentially revenue and appropriations are going to be identical numbers. As far as appropriations, we are looking at proposing a 4% cost of living increase. This is to mimic the union contract. If you remember at the last meeting when we talked about that increase, this is set by the CPI. City is already behind a little bit on what those increases would be. So this would make 4% across the board for all employees. We're finalizing those numbers. So as far as staffing, it's not a huge increase, but it does keep them, the union and the non-union, at the same level. The Department of Public Works has asked to add some additional part-time people during the summer, as well as some kind of on the shoulder seasons. Again, kind of working through this numbers, this adds about $15,000 to $20,000 to the budget for part-time staff spread throughout multiple funds, so water fund, sewer fund, streets, etc. The SRO, so school resource officer, that is a grant through the school. They cover 75 to 80% of that cost for that new staff person, so the city would have 25% of those wages. That will help with our overlap during the summertime, and they're not serving as a school resource officer, they go back to patrol duties. So we will have some additional costs there. We also have a retiring utility building department clerk, so Tina Rantham is retiring in this next fiscal year, so we will be looking for a replacement there. So those are all blank because we don't have the final numbers, but just so you know, those will be part of the work session discussions. Water projects, there is a requested, so DPW has put in a request for major project appropriations, about $255,000. There's only $135,000 in available funds for project activities this next year, so we have to kind of look to see what some of those priority projects are. The city is ahead of schedule for our lead and copper service line replacement. In fact, if we did not do any more in the next 2 years, we would still be on schedule for those replacements. We did also do a transfer of $150,000 from general fund into water this last year because that fund was overspent for lead service line replacement and also purchases. So there was initially $150,000 that was going to go into the road projects, which we'll have to do for next year. Transfer never happened, then we reallocated that to the water fund to make sure that that budget balance. Other appropriations, so we have finalized the election cost estimates for next year. So normally we would appropriate $11,300, so about $11,000 to $12,000. This is essentially going to double next year because it is the main election year. We also have to start doing early voting, so we will have some shared costs with probably Muskegon County will have that single location. So because of those changes in the election, we have some additional costs that we have to then allocate for next year. Cemetery, we do have a road chip and seal project, so portions of that cemetery are starting, the road is starting to degrade, so we can save those by doing a small chip and seal project along one corridor, so just about $10,000. Our ongoing parks and engineering activities within the parks is actually going to decrease a little bit from $72,700 this year down to about $50,000. This does include the Parks Subcommittee, I almost said Parks Department, Parks Subcommittee had talked through some improvements at Collin Field for that parking lot area, as well as adding a dog park section within the back of that. So this covers the engineering costs for that project. That's not for construction, that's for engineering. The nice thing about that project is it's a prime fit for receiving Spark grant funds in the following year. So that's nice, especially once we get to the Parks Maple Grove Beach project. That's $274,000 for that beach restoration project, just for the beach part. And I've talked with all of the funding entities. That one is not eligible for Sparks, Passport, Fisheries Trust, any of those. So that is a direct allocation by the city. I'm going to jump forward just a minute. So we've gotten the final numbers from the engineer. Total park, so if the city were to do all of the renovation projects for Maple Beach, including the beach itself, additional parking, the playground is no longer up to code or standards. That alone is about $150,000 to redo that, additional parking there. So total $643,000. Upland section, so essentially from this section north, 368, about 369,000. And then the shoreline work, so where the walkway was torn out, doing all the dredging to get the glass and metal out of that, put in docks, put in the retaining wall, new sidewalk, dedication benches, so $274,000. So that is being permitted currently as we speak, just as part of their engineering cost. So that would be a general fund allocation. Parks are already within general fund, so that would be utilizing that money to start that work. Let me jump back. So last year we put in the new digital sign. We had funds in there for landscaping, essentially cut out portions of that asphalt to do some landscaping around there. I do not believe it will cost $15,000, although asphalt removal will be a little pricey. Those funds are just being transferred from this current fiscal year to next year, so it's not a change in number. So the activities just didn't occur. Same thing with City Hall landscaping project. I think for 4 years I've had a line item to kind of do the landscaping around the City Hall, get it to start mimicking what's happened across the street, by the wall, by the book nook, kind of going down, and then the new tree and shrub planting. So $20,000 allocated for that project. The solar subcommittee had some projects in the current fiscal year, so those will wrap up There'll be a little bleed over into the next fiscal year. It's my recommendation that 2 of the new projects, well number 4 and the Old Channel Trail lift station, is just to wait on those, to not budget those. Reason being, first of all, we need to make sure that the projects from this current year get completed, and I want to make sure that how those federal funds are allocated to get 50% of the money back, that process before we keep moving forward with these. Those 2 projects, also well number 4, would hit the water fund, and then Old Channel Trail lift station would hit the sewer fund. So those being enterprise funds, we kind of let those just sit for a year. If we get into next spring, and it looks like things are going well, subcommittee could repropose those to come back. But I would say not to budget those for this next fiscal year. The one solar project proposed for next fiscal year, the campground office, which also connects to weather vane, would move forward. Campground is an enterprise fund, so self-sustaining, can afford the project, doesn't impact their operations. Initial cost is that $61,264. Half of that comes back, so $32,957. So making that return on investment 9 years. That's the only project for solar projects I would propose to move forward for the next fiscal year. Curbside leaf collection, that subcommittee did meet once. I'm still trying to get some additional information from the company. That subcommittee had a couple different ideas how to look at that, maybe purchasing the truck and leasing it to them, looking at how to restructure that. So right now I just have it as a placeholder until I get some information. I don't know where that's going to fall. I don't even know that the subcommittee will meet before the budget hearing. So that's where that is at. The other item that Councilman Hires and I had talked about a little bit is council laptops or pads. So if there is a desire by council to go more digital rather than getting paper copies and a police officer visiting your house every couple Fridays to deliver those packets, could actually purchase and then assign a laptop. So that laptop would be for any city business. You would be sent the link for the packet. It would be there. You would then bring that to the meeting. So that's an option. We would only need to appropriate $2,000 to $3,000 to do that because it would not need to be fully functional laptop, basic activities. The other nice thing about that is then it separates council members from their private and a public laptop. So anytime that you receive something from city or you send something to each other, whether it's a phone call, an email, whatever, if there were ever a situation and that needed to be confiscated, whether it's your personal or not, it becomes the property of that investigation until they were able to release it. So there is some niceties of having something separate. So if people would like to go that direction, we could put that as a line item for this next fiscal year. A lot of municipalities are doing this. I know a lot of the people that are on like countywide boards, then they also utilize that for those functions as well.
County Commission is doing it already.
Yep. This was the list from last time, so I just wanted to kind of throw this up. So our last meeting, I had a bunch of projects. Again, a lot of these you will see during the work session. So there's that shoreline project again, which I mentioned. There's all of the solar projects together, what the cost would have been. So we're pulling out 2 of those projects, school resource officer. So all of that list is the same. So all those projects, again, will kind of be formalized in the next couple weeks. As part of this budget process, so at the first meeting in June, we have the work session that is devoted just to the budget. So that's all we will talk about the individual funds. We start talking about the development of that budget book itself will be largely completed and distributed before the next meeting. And then in the actual council meeting on the 3rd Monday is the approval of that budget. So it is quite the process to get even to here, but we are getting close. So again, if you have comments, recommendations, things that you'd like to see looked at, now is the time, because the next time you will see it, it will be 99% complete. So, questions, comments, you want me to go back to any of these? Again, a lot of these major projects are coming out of those subcommittees as recommendations. You can see, even if they're coming as recommendations, even for solar projects, if they don't fit in, they don't make sense, you pull them out. Because everything is feathering it into where are the current finances at. And with some of those appropriations, even for the major ones, kind of being in flux, we always budget conservatively so that at the end of the fiscal year, we have additional funds, which is how we've built up our general fund reserve to that $1 million mark over the years.
Questions or comments?
Just a quick comment. The fact that you are 2 years ahead on supply line replacement, I'm guessing it's going to save money considering how quickly costs have gone up in terms of construction and parts. That's a good move.
Yeah, even, so this last year, so that 150,000, we had the contractor in place and they were just kept working on some projects. That pushed us way ahead in the timeline.
Yeah.
The city already replaces about 10 to 12 services just from simple water line breaks because it's those older lines. So even if we didn't appropriate anything for service line replacement besides those repairs, we would continue to be ahead of schedule for 3 to 4 years. So we've, it caused a little bit of stress with that $150,000 hole, but we did have those funds which weren't transferred to major streets that we're able to allocate. So.
Other comments or questions? Okay. Again, as Jeff mentioned, we will have a June 5th meeting, which will be the budget work session. Number 3 on the work session is public comment. Again, this is your chance to make any public comment.
Hi, Stephen Orwatt, 7652 Ravenswood. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Mr. City Manager, and I would like to thank Ms. Cox for bringing up this issue. I live on Ravenswood, and in the last year, I retired a handful of years ago to Montague, and I always tell people, it's like living with Andy Griffith, we see the police, wave to them when we drive by when I take my son to school, and that's one of the reasons we live here. Montague, I just think we care, and it's a beautiful place to live. On Ravenswood, just in the last year, we lost one of our properties, got split, and I went to 2 investors. Okay, 2 different investors, so now we've got an open lot across the street from the house that is going to be developed by a company out of Texas. And then we've got an investor from Chicago that bought the house next to ours on the lake. And when originally we found out it was going to become an Airbnb, I called Steve Coverly and he talked about it and he told me the rules, 120 days and whatnot. And I was surprised. I worked 6 years in the legislature, and so I'm aware of laws, and I still have many contacts there. And I called, I asked about the issues, and they think it's going to be tabled. It's not going to go any farther, removing local option. So I think that's a good idea. But one of the things I'd like to bring to the city council is, I've lived now for one summer next to an Airbnb, and I owned a restaurant in Aspen. And I saw the Aspenization of being a historian. I saw the Aspenization of Aspen was bad. 50 years ago, a mayoral candidate by the name of Hunter Thompson wanted to call the name of Aspen, wanted to change it to Fat City because of real estate investors. Okay, and so what happened is real estate investors came in and they really changed the character of a community. And that's something I'm really worried about. And I think we're going to see that. I'm already seeing more of a Cedar Village. I went to Michigan State, more of a Cedar Village, Animal House mentality in the renters next door, where I'm going to be here 2 days. I'm going to be here 3 days. I don't care if I break glass. I don't care if I'm loud. The lake is an echo chamber. You can hear a lot of different things on the lake. And it's a sense where at night now, it's a hard time some nights, depending on who the renter's gonna be. You know, it's a schizophrenia, because one day you got a quiet renter, then you have a bunch of people come in. A lot of motor vehicles, a lot of, you know, people go up to the sand dunes, whatnot, bring their buggies. And so it's something I didn't really expect when I bought my house 5-6 years ago. And then we finally moved here just a couple years ago. And I'm sort of worried about, you know, that Aspenization attitude where workers aren't going to be able to afford the type of properties they had before. And we're not going to, you know, we're not going to see people really pushed out of Montague, but we're going to see the loss of wild spaces. If you know Old Channel Trail, you know, we still have wild spaces between Cook, Old Channel Trail, the Armory, you know, and that land is really going to be gone if people are pushed out of it. And we have, you know, we lose that quality of life. We lose those open spaces. We lose in a way something that came here. And I just want to bring that, and I hope we continue the discussion.
Thank you.
It's an important issue.
We share your
Thank you.
concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Bruce?
Thank you, Mayor. Bruce Fralick, I'm in your alumni club. I live at 5150 Brookwood Circle in Montague. I'd urge you to get in touch with the Michigan Municipal League as a resource about this short-term rental issue. They have been promoting deeper discussions about that. They're a good way to cross-fertilize, find out what else is going on, other communities' solutions. I agree that zoning is one of the keys. You can say, for example, that in a single family, you know, you can put limits on single versus multi versus commercial, but you gotta decide soon or you'll end up like this gentleman. They'll be right next to you and you didn't act soon enough to keep that from happening. And it does put pressure on the working class, those who populate your restaurants and your other tourist-oriented who are lower wage will end up pushed further and further away from their workplace in order to afford a roof over their head, because the places close in will be beyond their budget. And that will affect your overall morale and your ability to find and retain employees in a very tourist-dependent area like ours. I don't know if you've had any savings this year about snow removal. I know it's been in relative terms a light winter, but I hope that might carry forward and have some good impact on some of these projects. I just hope you'll dig in on the zoning questions and the short-term rental issue, because it can be real trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else? Okay. Number 4 on the work session is a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Support. Before we take the vote on the motion to adjourn, I'd like to thank everybody who just made comments or made comments during the earlier session. We have a motion on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.